The 40 Japanese women sitting in that Okinawa tent didn't know they were already dead. Neither did the American nurse examining them. But in 67 days, one of them would make a choice that would save 441 lives, including 40 enemies who were supposed to die. Her name was Catherine Morrison, 28 years old, Iowa farm girl. 3 years of war had taught her the trick every combat nurse learned. Don't see them as human, see them as problems to solve. Puzzles of flesh and blood that either fit together or didn't. It worked perfectly until prisoner number 27 coughed blood into her hand. What would happen when an American nurse discovered that 40 enemy soldiers were dying of a disease that could kill more Americans than the entire Battle of Okinawa? The answer would destroy her career. Defy a colonel who'd lost his son at Iwo Jima and create a conspiracy that reached all the way to General MacArthur's office. But first she had to break a promise she'd made to herself 3 years ago. She had to start feeling again. This is the true story of how 40 Japanese nurses became 400 American lives saved, how tuberculosis almost changed the outcome of the Pacific War, how one woman's violation of military law became the right thing to do. Stay with me because what happens in the next 43 minutes will show you what the greatest generation truly meant when they said that's the whole job. The morning Kate Morrison walked into that detention compound, the smell hit her first. Unwashed bodies, latrine trenches, disinfectant that never quite masked the rot. She'd learned to breathe through her mouth at Guadalcanal. Now she didn't notice anymore. What she did notice was the coffee. Major Eleanor Hayes stood over a pot that had been burning since 4 in the morning. It tasted like diesel and regret, but it was American coffee. Strong, bitter, free. The kind of coffee you didn't get in Tokyo or Berlin. Kate poured herself a cup and thought about how strange it was that something as simple as bad coffee could mean so much. If you served in the Pacific during World War II, or if your father or grandfather did, this story is going to hit different. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're about to show you a side of the war they didn't teach in history class. And drop a comment if you remember what it was like when the Japanese prisoners started arriving on American soil. Let's honor that history together. July 1945. Okinawa had been secured for exactly 32 days. The bloodiest battle of the Pacific Theater had killed 12,000 Americans and over 100,000 Japanese. But the dying wasn't over. In detention camps across the island, disease was about to do what bullets couldn't. Eleanor Hayes didn't look up from her supply manifest. Gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. Morrison. We've got 40 Japanese females who came in last night. Picked up near the Shuri line. Command wants them processed before transfer to Guam. Eleanor Hayes was 52. She'd served in France during the Great War, back when they still called it that, back when people believed it would be the last one. She'd seen mustard gas and trench foot and the Spanish flu that killed more than all the artillery in Europe. When Eleanor said jump, you asked how high and then added another foot for good measure. What's their status? Kate poured herself a second cup. The ritual mattered more than the taste. Identified as medical support personnel. Nurses, orderlies, some kind of auxiliary corps. Most are malnourished, dehydrated, the usual. Sterling did a quick visual assessment last night, cleared them for general population holding. Kate set down her cup. Sterling did a visual assessment. He actually examined them. Eleanor's mouth twitched the closest she ever came to a smile. He looked at them through the fence and said they weren't bleeding to death. You know how he is about female patients, especially enemy ones. The Okinawan sun was already brutal at 7 in the morning. Kate felt sweat trickling down her spine under her uniform as she walked toward the detention compound. The island smelled like coral dust and diesel fuel. Nothing like Iowa, nothing like home. Private Sarah Kimura was waiting and looking uncomfortable in her uniform. 22 years old, dark eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who should still be in college. Her parents had been born in Kyoto, immigrated to Los Angeles in 1920, built a small grocery store. Then came December 7th, 1941. Morning lieutenant. Sarah's salute was crisp, almost defiant. She'd learned to overcompensate, to be more military than the soldiers, more American than the Americans. Kate returned the salute. At ease, Private. Have you been briefed 40 Japanese female prisoners? Medical examination. Full documentation. Standard procedure. Sarah shifted her weight. Can I ask something? Go ahead. Why didn't they use one of the male interpreters? Kawamoto or Sato? Kate had wondered the same thing. Hayes didn't say. Maybe she thought female patients would be more comfortable with female staff. Or maybe she knows the men would be less sympathetic. Sarah's voice went flat. My cousin died at Manzanar. Tuberculosis. She was 16. The camp doctor said she had a cold, told her to rest. By the time they moved her to the hospital barracks, it was too late. What Sarah didn't say, what Kate didn't know yet. Tuberculosis was killing more prisoners of war than combat injuries. In camps across the Pacific and detention centers from California to Texas, the disease was spreading, and 40 women in an Okinawa tent were about to become patient zero for an epidemic that could change everything. They walked toward the detention area in silence. Kate thought about offering comfort, but comfort was a luxury nobody could afford. Instead, she picked up her medical bag and headed toward the compound, toward 40 women who didn't know they were dying, toward a choice that would define the rest of her life. The detention area was surrounded by 2 fences, each topped with barbed wire separated by a 10-foot no-man's land that sentries patrolled every 15 minutes. The women were housed in a single large tent at the eastern edge, guarded by 2 Marines who looked young enough to be in high school. The younger Marine, his name tape read. Walsh glanced at Sarah with barely concealed suspicion. Private Danny Walsh, 19 years old, Irish Catholic from Boston. He'd been on Okinawa for 6 weeks and still flinched at loud noises. Does she speak English, ma'am? His Boston accent thick enough to cut. Private Kimura is your superior officer, Marine. You'll address her appropriately, or I'll have a conversation with your CO about military courtesy. Walsh's face went red. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Inside the tent, 40 women sat in silence. They'd arranged themselves in precise rows despite the absence of any furniture. Back straight, hands folded in laps, eyes fixed on nothing. Most wore the remnants of military-style uniforms, gray or khaki, many torn and stained. Some were barefoot. Their ages ranged from late teens to mid-30s, but they all wore the same expression. Carefully controlled terror. Kate had seen that look before. On Marines waiting for artillery to stop. On civilians pulled from bombed-out buildings. It was the look of people who expected to die and were trying to maintain dignity while they waited. Tell them I'm a nurse. Tell them I'm here to check their health, not to hurt them. Sarah spoke in rapid Japanese. None of the women moved. None of them looked up. Try again. Tell them this is required by military regulation, but I'll be as quick and gentle as possible. Sarah repeated the message. Still nothing. Then from the back row, one woman stood. She was older than most of the others. Mid-20s, Kate estimated, with short hair and a bearing that suggested rank. When she spoke, her English was clear and unaccented. I am Sergeant Yuki Nakamura, Japanese Army Nursing Corps. These women are under my supervision. We will cooperate with your examination. Kate blinked. You speak English. I studied at missionary school before the war. I can translate if it helps your work proceed more efficiently. Yuki's face was carefully neutral, but her hands trembled slightly. May I ask what will happen to us after the examination? Kate met her eyes. You'll be transferred to a larger facility. Beyond that, I don't know. Have any of you been examined by a doctor since your capture? A man looked at us through the fence last night. He did not enter. Sterling. Of course. Captain Richard Sterling had made his opinions abundantly clear during the 3 months Kate had been assigned to the camp. Women were distractions. Enemy women were security risks. Enemy women who might need medical attention were someone else's problem. He was a brilliant surgeon. Kate had watched him reconstruct a Marine's face after a grenade blast with the kind of precision that belonged in a teaching hospital. But his bedside manner made barbed wire seem welcoming. All right, I need to do individual examinations. Standard procedure. Temperature, blood pressure check for injuries or illness. Sergeant Nakamura, you're first. Yuki followed without hesitation, but Kate noticed the way her breathing had quickened. Behind the canvas screen, she stood at rigid attention. You can sit. This will be easier if you're not about to pass out. Yuki sat. Up close, Kate could see the signs. Dark circles under her eyes, cracked lips, skin with that papery quality of severe dehydration. Her uniform hung loose, suggesting recent weight loss. Kate pressed the stethoscope to Yuki's back. Deep breath. The lungs sounded clear. Heart rate elevated but regular. Another breath. Still clear. You can go back now. Yuki coughed. Quick. Almost suppressed. The kind of cough you try to hide during a quiet moment. She covered her mouth with her hand. How long have you had that cough? It's nothing. Dust from the roads. Kate had heard that before. Men with shrapnel in their legs claiming they'd twisted an ankle. Soldiers with sucking chest wounds insisting they just had the wind knocked out of them. The military taught you to minimize, to push through, to never admit weakness. Cough again. Deliberately this time. Yuki did. It was wet, productive, coming from deep in the chest. Kate moved the stethoscope to different positions, listening carefully. There. A slight crackling in the upper right lobe. Rails. Her stomach tightened. Night sweats, sometimes. Weight loss. Everyone loses weight in war. How much? Roughly 20 pounds. Maybe more. 20 pounds on a frame that probably started at 110. Kate looked at Yuki's neck, noticing for the first time the slightly swollen lymph nodes. Classic presentation. Textbook. Really. She sat back. The pieces were falling into place. Wet cough, night sweats, weight loss, lymphadenopathy, rails in the upper lobes. If I'm sick, will you treat me or will you let me die because it's more convenient? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and honest. Kate thought about all the easy answers. Protocol requires treatment. Geneva Convention mandates care. We're not barbarians, but they all felt hollow. I became a nurse to help people, not to choose who deserves to live. Something shifted in Yuki's expression, though Kate couldn't quite identify what. Then you are a better person than this war deserves. The second examination was Michiko Yamamoto, 34 years old, a teacher before the war pressed into medical service. Polite, cooperative. And when Kate asked her to breathe deeply, she heard the same crackling rails. Fever 100.1 degrees. Slightly swollen lymph nodes. Persistent cough she tried to suppress. The third was Reiko Tanaka, 23, a radio operator. Hostile, suspicious, refusing to make eye contact. Same symptoms. Fever 99.9 degrees. Same cough. Same rails. By the fifth examination, Kate's hands had started to shake. By the 10th, she was taking notes with mechanical precision, each entry identical to the last. Patient presents with low-grade fever, persistent cough, night sweats, recent weight loss, lymphadenopathy, rails in upper lobes. Patient, patient, patient. 40 variations of the same deadly pattern. When she examined number 12 Hanasato, 19 years old, barely more than a child, the girl coughed and blood speckled her hand. Not much, just a few drops. Enough. Kate stood up so fast the chair fell backward. Lieutenant Sarah jumped. I need to speak with Major Hayes now. Kate's voice came out strangled. She picked up her bag with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Stay here. Don't let anyone leave this tent. Don't let anyone else enter. What's wrong? Kate looked at the 40 women sitting in their careful rows, waiting patiently to learn their fate. Most of them were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Everything is wrong. She made it outside the tent before her knees gave out. She sat in the mud in the space between the fences, and for the first time in 3 years she cried. Not gentle tears, harsh, ugly sobbing that came from somewhere deep in her chest, somewhere she'd locked away the day she decided feeling was too dangerous. The Marine stared at her. She didn't care. Sarah found her 5 minutes later. She sat down in the mud beside her, not speaking. Just present. They're all dying, all 40 of them. Tuberculosis, advanced cases, most of them. And they're sitting in that tent together, sharing air, breathing it in and out, making each other sicker. You don't know for sure. You'd need x-rays, sputum tests. I know. I've seen enough TB in field hospitals to recognize it. The night sweats, the fever, the weight loss, the bloody cough. Hana's already showing hemoptysis. If we don't treat them immediately, they'll all be dead in a month, and they'll take out half this camp with them. Sarah went very still. The camp, you mean the other prisoners? I mean everyone. Marines, soldiers, prisoners, staff. Tuberculosis doesn't care what uniform you wear. It doesn't care who won the war. You put 40 active cases in a crowded camp with poor sanitation and limited medical facilities, and you get an epidemic. What are you going to do? Kate stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but she locked her knees and forced herself upright. I'm going to save their lives, and then I'm probably going to get court-martialed for it. Major Eleanor Hayes listened to Kate's report with the kind of attention most people reserve for defusing bombs. When Kate finished, Eleanor leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temples. You're absolutely certain. As certain as I can be without laboratory confirmation. But Eleanor, Betty, I've treated TB cases. I know what it looks like. In 40 cases presenting with nearly identical symptoms in a single cohort. That's not coincidence. That's an outbreak. What do you need? Immediate isolation. Proper quarantine facility, not a tent. Chest x-rays to confirm diagnosis. Sputum cultures. And streptomycin. Lots of streptomycin. Eleanor picked up a pencil, put it down, picked it up again. The closest to agitated Kate had ever seen her. You're aware streptomycin is still experimental. Limited supply reserved for critical American personnel. I'm aware. I'm also aware that if we don't use it now, we're going to need 10 times as much to treat the epidemic. Eleanor stood up and walked to the coffee pot, the same pot that had been burning since 4 in the morning. She poured 2 cups diesel and regret and handed one to Kate. You know what this coffee represents? Eleanor didn't wait for an answer. It represents the fact that we're Americans. We waste resources on bad coffee because we can, because we have abundance, because even in war, even on a God-forsaken island in the Pacific, we have enough. She sat down. Those 40 women, they're dying because their country couldn't afford to waste resources on keeping nurses healthy. They rationed food, rationed medicine, rationed hope. And now we have to decide. Do we become them? Do we let scarcity make us cruel? Or do we waste our abundance on saving enemies? Kate sipped the terrible coffee. It tasted like freedom. Betty, this is bigger than politics. This is basic epidemiology. I know. But Colonel Cross won't see it that way. Eleanor's voice went soft. Cross will never approve this. You know that, right? He lost his son at Iwo Jima, 23 years old, named Benjamin Jr. after his father. They called him Benji. Shrapnel to the chest. Bled out before the medics could reach him. Cross got the telegram on March 19th. 3 days later, he was back at his desk signing supply requisitions. Never mentioned it again. Never grieved in public. Just kept working. She paused. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write up a formal report. Every detail, every symptom, every piece of evidence. Make it so technical and terrifying that anyone who reads it understands we're sitting on a biological time bomb. Then you're going to present it to Cross. He'll never listen to me. Probably not. But protocol requires it. And when he refuses, we'll have documentation showing we followed proper channels. Then I'll take it higher. Eleanor smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about nothing else since I left that tent. All right, get those women isolated. Use the old surgical tent on the north end. Post guards, no one in or out without protective equipment. And Kate, yes ma'am, prepare yourself for a fight because this is going to get ugly. Colonel Benjamin Cross kept his office at exactly 68 degrees regardless of the Okinawan heat outside. He sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a bank. Every paper aligned at perfect right angles, every pen lined up with military precision. On the wall behind him hung a photograph of a young Marine in dress uniform, smiling with the kind of optimism that only existed before you learned what war actually meant. Kate stood at attention while Cross read her report. He took his time turning each page with deliberate care, his face revealing nothing. When he finished, he set the papers down and aligned them perfectly with the edge of his desk. His hands were large scarred from years of manual work before he became an officer. Tuberculosis, yes sir. 40 cases, yes sir. Japanese prisoners, yes sir. Cross folded his hands. And your recommended course of action is to requisition experimental antibiotics, establish specialized quarantine facilities, and divert medical resources to treat enemy combatants who were trying to kill Americans 6 weeks ago. Sir, with respect, tuberculosis was trying to kill Americans 6 weeks ago. It's still trying now. If we don't contain this, I've read your report, Lieutenant. The epidemiological projections, the infection rates, all very impressive. He leaned forward. Tell me something. How many American soldiers are currently waiting for medical supplies in this theater? I don't have exact numbers, sir. I do. 43,000 wounded personnel requiring ongoing treatment, another 18,000 cases of malaria, dysentery, and other tropical diseases. We're rationing morphine. We're rationing penicillin. His voice never rose above conversational. That somehow made it worse. Last week, I had to decide whether to authorize pain medication for a Marine who lost both legs or save it for surgical cases. He was 19 years old, and I had to tell him to grit his teeth because we didn't have enough drugs to waste on making him comfortable. Cross stood up and walked to the window. Now you want me to take our limited supply of an experimental antibiotic and give it to Japanese prisoners. You want me to explain to American mothers why their sons died without medication while enemy soldiers received treatment. Do you understand what you're asking? I'm asking you to prevent an epidemic that will kill more Americans than the Battle of Okinawa. That's speculation. That's mathematics. Tuberculosis in crowded conditions spreads exponentially. We have approximately 4,000 personnel on this base. Conservative infection rate puts us at 200 cases within 6 weeks. Mortality rate without treatment is 60%. That's 120 dead Americans because we failed to quarantine and treat the initial outbreak. Or we isolate the Japanese prisoners and let nature take its course. 40 dead enemies, 0 dead Americans. The words landed like a physical blow. Sir, that would be a violation of the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention requires us to provide reasonable medical care. It doesn't require us to give prisoners experimental medications we don't have enough of for our own troops. Cross picked up a pen, made a notation on a different document. Your request is denied. Isolate the prisoners, provide supportive care. Fluids rest basic pain management. Document everything for Red Cross inspection. But no streptomycin, no specialized treatment. Is that clear, sir? They'll die. Yes, they will, and that's unfortunate. But I'm not in the business of prioritizing enemy lives over American ones. Dismissed. Kate didn't move. 3 years of military discipline warred with 3 years of medical training. Colonel, if I may speak freely. You may not. Dismissed, Lieutenant. She saluted. It took everything she had. Outside Cross's office, Kate found Captain Richard Sterling waiting. Arms crossed, expression smug. Let me guess. No. You knew he would. Of course I knew. Anyone with half a brain knew. Sterling fell into step beside her. Look, Morrison, I get it. You're a nurse. You want to save everyone. Very noble. But this is war. People die. Enemy people die first. That's how it works. Those women are sick. Those women are combatants. They wore uniforms. They supported enemy military operations. They contributed to killing Americans. The fact that they're dying of disease instead of bullets doesn't make them any less responsible for what happened. Kate stopped walking. Is that what you tell yourself, that it's okay to withhold treatment because they're the enemy? I tell myself that I have a job to do, and that job is keeping American soldiers alive. Every gram of streptomycin I give to a Japanese prisoner is a gram I can't give to a Marine. Every hour I spend treating enemies is an hour I'm not treating allies. Sterling's voice dropped. 6 months ago, I operated on a kid from Nebraska, 20 years old. Grenade took off half his face. I rebuilt his jaw using bone from his hip, reconstructed his cheek with tissue grafts, spent 14 hours in surgery. He lived. He paused. 3 weeks later, I ran out of penicillin for his infection because command diverted our supplies to another base. He died of sepsis drowning in his own pus because I didn't have $20 worth of antibiotics. He leaned closer. So forgive me if I'm not eager to give experimental medications to people who were shooting at that kid 6 months ago. You want to play St. Clara of Assisi, go ahead, but don't expect me to help you. He walked away. Kate stood in the hallway shaking with rage. She couldn't express, couldn't channel, couldn't use. The worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. Resources were limited, choices had to be made. In pure utilitarian calculus, saving American soldiers over Japanese prisoners made perfect sense. But calculus didn't account for the way Hanasato had tried to smile when Kate examined her, even though she was coughing blood. It didn't account for the careful dignity of 40 women sitting in precise rows waiting to die with as much grace as they could manage. It didn't account for the fact that disease didn't care about nationality and epidemics didn't respect battle lines. Kate had moved the 40 women to the old surgical tent, better than the detention compound. More space, better ventilation, actual cots. But it was still a death sentence without medication. She set up what quarantine protocols she could with available supplies. Surgical masks for anyone entering, separate eating utensils, isolation from general camp population. The women accepted the transfer with the same silent dignity they'd shown before. Yuki helped organize them, establishing sleeping arrangements, coordinating bathroom schedules, maintaining order. She moved like someone who'd been in charge before, who understood that leadership meant taking responsibility for the survival of everyone under your command. On the third night, Kate found her sitting outside the tent staring at the stars. She'd lost weight even in the few days since the examination. Her uniform hung looser, her face more gaunt. "You should be resting. I rest enough." The cough was getting worse. "Tell me something, Lieutenant. When you examined us, you knew immediately what was wrong." "Yes, no point in lying, and you reported it to your superiors." "Yes, and they refused treatment. They refused specialized treatment. I'm authorized to provide supportive care." Yuki smiled without humor. "Supportive care, a kind way to say let them die comfortably. My English is better than you think. I know what those words mean." Kate sat down beside her. It probably violated a dozen protocols, but she was already planning to commit career suicide. Sitting with a prisoner seemed minor by comparison. "What happened to you before you were captured? I mean, where were you serving? Philippines, Manila mostly." "Army hospital near the port. We treated wounded soldiers, Japanese mostly, but sometimes civilians, sometimes American prisoners." "You treated American prisoners?" "Of course. They were wounded. That's what doctors and nurses do. We treat the wounded." Yuki looked at her. "Or that's what I thought. Your Captain Sterling explained that I was wrong. That medicine has sides." Kate felt something hot and sharp in her chest. "Sterling is an overly rigid adherent to military protocol who has forgotten the Hippocratic Oath. Despite everything, despite the war and the disease and the death." Yuki laughed. It turned into a coughing fit, wet and painful. But when she recovered, she was smiling. "I saved an American soldier in Manila, February 1945. He had sepsis from a leg wound. The Japanese doctor said to let him die. Waste of resources. But I knew how to treat sepsis. I'd seen it before. So I stole antibiotics from our supply room. Treated him at night when no one was watching. He lived. 2 weeks later, he was transferred to a different camp. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of metal, a dog tag. He gave me this. Said maybe someday it would help someone believe I wasn't a monster. I don't know if he survived the rest of the war. I don't know if anyone told his family what happened. But I know I did the right thing even though it could have gotten me executed." Kate took the dog tag. It read Private First Class James Whitmore, U.S. Army O positive. The medal was warm from being held. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're trying to decide if we're worth saving. If 40 Japanese nurses deserve the same care you'd give 40 American nurses. And I want you to know that some of us made the same choice you're making now. Some of us chose medicine over war, even when it was dangerous, even when it was stupid." Yuki took back the dog tag. That American soldier, James Whitmore. He was someone's son, maybe someone's brother. He would have died if I'd followed orders. Instead, I broke them. If I'm going to die now, I'd like to think it meant something. That somewhere Whitmore is alive, and maybe he tells people about the enemy nurse who saved his life. Kate stood up. The decision was made. "Get some rest, Sergeant. Doctor's orders. Lieutenant Morrison." Yuki's voice stopped her. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. They will punish you for helping us." "I know. And you're going to do it anyway. I know that too. Getting the streptomycin required careful planning. The camp pharmacy kept controlled medications in a locked cabinet in the medical supply tent monitored by a log sheet that required signatures for every withdrawal. Simply stealing it would be noticed immediately. Kate needed a legitimate reason to access the medication, and she needed enough of it to treat 40 patients for the full course. 6 to 8 weeks of daily injections. The math was depressing. Each patient needed roughly 2 grams per day. 40 patients meant 80 grams daily, 560 grams per week. approximately 4,500 grams for a full treatment course. The camp had maybe 500 grams total rationed carefully for American personnel with severe infections. She needed another source. Lieutenant David Chen ran supply logistics for the Medical Corps on Okinawa. 31 years old, perpetually exhausted, and he'd perfected the art of creative accounting that kept military operations functional. Every base had someone like him, the person who could acquire things that weren't officially available, who understood that paperwork was more important than reality, who knew which rules were sacred and which were suggestions. Kate found him in the supply warehouse conducting inventory with the enthusiasm of someone contemplating dental surgery. "Chen, I need a favor." He didn't look up from his clipboard. Everyone needs favors. "Get in line. I need streptomycin, a lot of it, at least 5 kilos. That got his attention. 5 kilos? Jesus Christ, Morrison. What are you planning to do? Treat the entire Imperial Japanese Army, just 40 prisoners? Oh, well, that's reasonable then. His sarcasm could have stripped paint. You know, streptomycin is Class A controlled, right? I'd have an easier time getting you heroin. At least with heroin, I'd only get 10 years in Leavenworth instead of 20. Kate had prepared for this. She pulled out a folder, set it on the stack of supply crates between them. Read this. What is it? Epidemiological projection. If we don't treat the current outbreak, we're looking at approximately 200 cases within 6 weeks. That means 6 weeks of quarantine protocols, medical resources, productivity loss. Conservative estimate puts the cost at $3 million. Treatment now costs about $5,000 worth of antibiotics. Chen flipped through the report. You wrote this with help from Major Hayes. She won't say it officially, but she agrees with the analysis. And Cross wants to isolate and let them die, which is the legally safe option, which is the option that leads to an epidemic. Chen set down the folder. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to steal 5 kilos of streptomycin from military medical supplies, falsified documentation to cover the theft, and provide it to you so you can treat prisoners in direct violation of orders from a full colonel. And your justification is that it might prevent a hypothetical epidemic that might happen if we don't treat them. That's about right. You're insane. Probably. You'll get court-martialed. Probably. I'll get court-martialed. Only if they catch us. Chen was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. My brother had tuberculosis, 1938. He was 15. We couldn't afford treatment. My parents tried everything. Sent him to a sanatorium in the mountains. Special diet cod, liver oil, all the folk remedies. He died anyway. Took 6 months. By the end, he weighed maybe 70 pounds, and he was coughing up pieces of his lungs. He met Kate's eyes. I was 12. I had to watch him die slowly, knowing there was medicine that could have saved him if we'd had money for it. And now you're telling me we have the medicine, but we're not using it because of politics. I'm sorry about your brother. Don't be sorry, just don't waste the medication. If I'm going to throw away my career for this, I want those 40 women to live. All of them. Deal. Deal. Chen stood up. Give me 3 days. I'll have the streptomycin by Friday. You'll need syringes, alcohol wipes, proper storage. I'll include those too. But Morrison, yeah, you're going to owe me the biggest favor in the history of the Pacific Theater. Name it. I haven't decided yet. But when I do, you'll do it. No questions, no hesitation. Whatever I ask, Kate thought about what she was promising. A blank check to a supply officer who had just agreed to commit theft. But 40 women were dying and she was out of options. Agreed. The lessons happened at night after official duties ended in the corner of the nurses' barracks where they were least likely to be overheard. Sarah wrote out phonetic pronunciations, made Kate repeat phrases until they sounded natural, explained the careful politeness Japanese required even in medical contexts. When you ask about symptoms, use nanika for something and arimasu ka for is there. So do you have fever becomes netsu ga arimasu ka. Kate repeated the phrase. Her accent was terrible, but Sarah didn't laugh. And if they say yes, hi means yes, IIE means no. But they might also just nod or shake their head. Body language works the same everywhere. What about explaining treatment? That's harder. Medical terminology is complex. Your best bet is to demonstrate and use simple words. Kusuri, medicine, shusha, injection, nonde kudasai, please drink. They practiced for 3 hours. Kate's pronunciation was terrible. Sarah winced frequently, but she could make herself understood. That would have to be enough. If you're watching this and thinking about the values that made America great, the belief that every human life has dignity, that medicine doesn't get to choose sides, that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard, then this next part is going to hit you right in the chest. Because what Kate Morrison is about to do will cost her everything, but it will save 441 lives. Hit that like button if you believe some rules are meant to be broken, and drop a comment telling us, would you have done what Kate did? Would you have risked your career to save 40 enemies? Let's talk about it. The streptomycin arrived Friday morning, hidden in a crate labeled surgical supplies perishable. Chen had included everything. Syringes, needles, alcohol prep pads, even a detailed instruction sheet on proper dosing and administration. Enough for 8 weeks of treatment with some buffer for complications. Kate waited until late evening after official duties ended and most personnel were in the mess tent or barracks. She loaded the supplies into her medical bag, added some legitimate items to make it look routine, and headed toward the quarantine tent. The guard on duty was Private Danny Walsh, young and nervous, the kind of soldier who followed orders precisely because thinking for himself was terrifying. Evening, Lieutenant, evening, Walsh. Just checking on the patients. Captain Sterling's orders say no medical treatment beyond supportive care, ma'am. I'm aware of the captain's orders. I'm here to monitor vital signs and ensure the patients are stable. Standard quarantine protocol. Walsh clearly wanted to argue but didn't have the authority. He let her pass. Inside the tent, conditions had deteriorated. Several women were feverish. Most were coughing. Hana Sato looked like she might not make it through the night. Yuki was moving between patients, providing water, offering what comfort she could with no medications. She froze when she saw Kate's bag. Sergeant Nakamura, I need your help. What kind of help? Kate sat down the bag and pulled out a vial of streptomycin, the kind that might get both of us executed. Can you administer injections? Yuki stared at the vial. You got it, the medication. But your colonel refused. I didn't ask the colonel. I'm asking you. Can you help me, or do I need to treat all 40 patients myself for the first time since they'd met? Yuki smiled, a genuine smile. I can help. What do you need? They worked through the night. Kate showed Yuki the proper dosing. 1 gram twice daily for adults adjusted for weight. They started with the most critical cases. Hana first, then 3 others who were showing signs of advanced disease. The injections had to be intramuscular, deep in the gluteal muscle, rotated between sides to prevent abscess formation. The women endured it stoically. Most didn't ask questions. A few thanked Kate in soft Japanese. One, Reiko Tanaka, the hostile radio operator, cried silently while receiving her injection, tears running down her face without sound. Why does she cry? Kate asked Yuki. She thought she would die. We all thought we would die. You're giving her hope. Sometimes hope is more painful than despair. By dawn, all 40 women had received their first dose. Kate showed Yuki how to store the medication properly, how to maintain the injection schedule, how to monitor for adverse reactions. This needs to continue every day for 6 to 8 weeks. I'll come when I can, but there will be times when I can't get away without raising suspicion. You'll need to handle some injections yourself, I understand. Yuki hesitated. Lieutenant Morrison, why are you doing this? You're risking everything, your career, your freedom, maybe your life. We're enemies. We're supposed to be beneath your concern. Kate packed up her bag. She was exhausted, wired on adrenaline and fear, and the question deserved a better answer than she had. My father was a doctor, small town in Iowa, population maybe 3,000. He treated everyone, farmers, shopkeepers, even the homeless men who rode the rails during the Depression. When I was 16, someone asked him why he'd spend hours treating a vagrant who couldn't pay when he had paying patients waiting. You know what he said? Yuki shook her head. He said, because that man is sick and I'm a doctor and that's the whole job. No politics, no economics, no judgment. Just medicine. Kate shouldered her bag. I spent 3 years forgetting that. Letting the war turn patients into problems, people into statistics. But when I examined you and the others, I remembered. That's the whole job. And I've been doing it wrong. She left before Yuki could respond. Outside, the sun was rising over Okinawa, turning the sky shades of pink and gold. that had no right to be that beautiful in a place that had seen so much death. Walsh was still at his post, looking exhausted. "Everything okay in there, Lieutenant? Everything's fine, Private D. Just monitoring vital signs." She made it back to the nurse's barracks, collapsed onto her cot, and slept for 3 hours before Eleanor shook her awake. "Morrison, we have a problem." Kate sat up instantly alert. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where Captain Sterling has questions about why you're spending so much time in the quarantine tent. The kind where Colonel Cross is demanding a full report on the status of the Japanese prisoners. The kind where if you've done what I think you've done, we're both going to end our careers in spectacular fashion." "Betty, I don't want to know." Eleanor's voice was carefully controlled. "Officially, I don't want to know. Unofficially, tell me you were careful. I was careful. Careful enough that it won't be obvious. Careful enough that we have plausible deniability for at least a week. After that, when the patients start showing improvement, it's going to be impossible to hide." Eleanor sat down on the adjacent cot. She suddenly looked old, worn down by years of war and bureaucracy and impossible choices. "You know what's going to happen when they figure it out, court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly prison time. And you're okay with that." Kate thought about 40 women who would be alive when they should have been dead, about an epidemic prevented before it started, about choosing to be human in a situation designed to make humanity impossible. "I'm okay with it." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then we better make sure you don't get caught. At least not until those women are well enough to be transferred. Once they're out of this camp, it becomes someone else's problem. Until then, we need to control the narrative." How? By giving Cross what he wants. A report showing that the Japanese prisoners are being properly isolated, provided with supportive care per Geneva Convention requirements, and pose minimal risk to camp personnel. Nothing about active treatment, nothing about antibiotics. Just a nice boring document that says everything is under control. You'd lie for me, I prefer to think of it as strategic omission. I'm not saying you're treating them. I'm just not saying you're not treating them. There's a difference. Eleanor stood up. "Write the report today. Make it thorough, technical, and deadly boring. I'll submit it to Cross with my endorsement. That should buy you a few weeks before anyone looks too closely. And when they do look closely, then we'll deal with it. But Morrison, when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, I'm going to deny knowing anything about it. I'll testify that you acted alone against orders without authorization. I'll throw you under every bus truck and tank in the Pacific Theater." "I understand." "Good. Because while I'm doing that publicly, I'll be working privately to make sure you don't spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth. I've been in this army for 27 years. I've got connections. I'll use them. But I need you to be the visible sacrifice so I can work behind the scenes." Can you accept that Kate thought about it? Being publicly disgraced so Eleanor could pull strings privately. Taking the full blame so others could help without being implicated. It was pragmatic, ruthless, and probably the only way any of them survived this. "I can accept it. Then get to work on that report." And Morrison, "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having the courage to do what I should have done myself." The next 2 weeks established a routine. Kate visited the quarantine tent daily, ostensibly to monitor vital signs and ensure proper isolation protocols. In reality, she was administering streptomycin, tracking patient responses, adjusting dosages for side effects. The women were responding to treatment. Fevers dropped. Coughs lessened. Weight started to stabilize. By week 4, most were strong enough to walk around the tent. By week 6, they looked like different people. Yuki recovered fastest, probably because she'd hidden the full extent of her illness initially. She became Kate's unofficial assistant, helping with translations, organizing the other women, maintaining morale. They developed a working relationship that transcended language and nationality, built on mutual respect and shared competence. But success brought new problems. As patients improved, it became harder to explain why supposedly terminal TB cases were surviving. Captain Sterling noticed. He cornered Kate outside the mess tent on day 12. "I reviewed the vital signs reports from the quarantine tent. Okay, several patients showing improvement. Fever resolution, decreased respiratory symptoms, improved appetite. That's good news. Is it because untreated tuberculosis doesn't spontaneously improve, Morrison? It gets worse. Progressively, inevitably, it's worse until the patients die or receive specific antibiotic therapy. Sterling stepped closer. So either you've discovered a miracle cure or someone is treating those prisoners against direct orders. Maybe their TB wasn't as advanced as I thought. You wrote in your initial assessment that multiple patients showed signs of advanced disease. Hemoptysis, cavitary lesions based on auscultation. Now you're saying you were wrong. Diagnosis can be premature without X-rays or lab confirmation. The word came out flat. Factual bullshit. Sterling's voice dropped. You know what you saw. You're treating them. With what I don't know, probably streptomycin from God knows where. But you're treating them. Kate met his eyes. If I were treating them, which I'm not confirming or denying, wouldn't that be the ethically correct choice? Prevent an epidemic, save lives, uphold medical standards. Ethically correct, legally wrong. You want to know the difference between us, Morrison. I follow orders, even when they're hard. You break them when they're inconvenient. That makes you feel noble, but it makes you dangerous. And letting 40 women die of a preventable disease makes you feel what exactly? Patriotic. It makes me feel like I'm doing my job, which is supporting American military objectives, not playing Mother Teresa to enemy combatants. Sterling leaned in. I'm going to figure out what you're doing, and when I do, I'm going to report it. Not because I hate you, but because rules matter, especially in war. Especially when breaking them means taking resources from Americans and giving them to enemies. He walked away. Kate's hands were shaking. She'd known this moment would come, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Sterling was smart, observant, and motivated by genuine belief that he was doing the right thing. He'd find proof. It was only a matter of time. On week 5, day 2, Private Walsh caught Kate administering an injection at 2 in the morning. She thought everyone was asleep. She was wrong. Walsh entered the tent unexpectedly. He'd heard a noise, wanted to investigate. He saw Kate with a syringe, Yuki assisting, a vial of streptomycin clearly visible on the medical tray. There was a moment of frozen silence. Kate's career flashing before her eyes. Court-martial, prison, everything lost. Then Walsh spoke, his Boston accent soft in the darkness. I didn't see anything, ma'am, Private. My sister had tuberculosis. Back in Boston, 1942. She was 14. We couldn't get medication. Black market penicillin cost more than my father made in a year. She died in our kitchen, drowning in her own blood, while my mother held her. Walsh's voice cracked. So whatever you're doing in here, Lieutenant, I didn't see it. But please, for the love of God, be more careful. Thank you, Danny. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He nodded and left, never reporting what he'd seen, never speaking of it again. But from that night forward, whenever Kate approached the quarantine tent, Walsh would cough loudly if anyone else was nearby. A warning system, a kindness. Week 4 brought a different complication. An unannounced Red Cross inspector arrived at the camp. Protocol required inspection of all detention facilities. Standard procedure for Geneva Convention compliance. Eleanor had to divert the inspector to different areas of the camp, creating elaborate explanations for why the quarantine tent was off limits. Infectious disease protocols, safety concerns, paperwork delays. The inspector was persistent, but eventually satisfied. Eleanor's performance was masterful, but it had been close. Too close. Afterward, Eleanor found Kate in the medical tent. We got lucky. Won't happen again. Sterling is asking questions. Cross wants weekly updates. And someone at Fleet Medical Command is starting to audit supply records. How long do we have? David Chen estimates 72 hours before they trace the streptomycin. Maybe less if Sterling pushes hard enough. The treatment needs 6 to 8 weeks total. We're only at week 5, I know. So what do we do? Eleanor was quiet for a long time. We pray for a miracle, or we prepare for the consequences. The miracle didn't come. The consequences did. 3 days later, Colonel Cross called an emergency meeting of senior medical staff. Kate, Eleanor, Sterling, and 2 other doctors crowded into his frigid office while he stood at his window, back turned, shoulders rigid. Yesterday, I received a communication from Pacific Fleet Medical Command. They're conducting an audit of streptomycin usage across all bases in theater. Apparently, there have been reports of missing supplies, falsified requisitions, and unauthorized treatments. He turned around. Anyone here have any idea what that might be? About silence, the kind that crushes lungs? Sterling looked at Kate. His expression was complex, not triumph, something closer to regret. Lieutenant Morrison, Cross's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and you're going to give me a direct answer. Have you been treating the Japanese prisoners in quarantine with streptomycin or any other controlled medication? This was it. The moment where lying would make everything worse, but telling the truth would end everything immediately. Kate thought about her father treating vagrants who couldn't pay, about Yuki saving James Whitmore in Manila, about 40 women whose only crime was being sick on the wrong side of a war they didn't start. Yes, sir, I have. The words landed like artillery shells. Eleanor closed her eyes. One of the other doctors swore softly. Sterling's expression didn't change. Against my direct orders? Yes, sir. Using medication obtained through falsified requisitions? Yes, sir. With full knowledge that you were violating military law, medical supply regulations, and operational orders? Yes, sir. Cross was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but Kate could hear the rage underneath. Explain to me why I shouldn't have you arrested immediately, because it was the correct medical decision. Because leaving 40 active TB cases untreated in a crowded camp would have caused an epidemic that would have killed more Americans than the entire Battle of Okinawa. Because sometimes following orders means enabling preventable deaths, and I'm not willing to do that. You're not willing, Cross's voice went cold deadly. Lieutenant, your willingness is irrelevant. You're a soldier. You follow orders. That's the entire basis of military discipline. I'm a nurse first, sir. Soldier second. And nurses don't get to choose who deserves to live based on which flag they salute. How dare you? The words came out quiet, more dangerous for their softness. My son died on Iwo Jima, 23 years old. Benjamin Jr. We called him Benji. He took shrapnel to the chest and bled out before the medics could reach him. Maybe if we'd had more medical supplies, better equipment, more antibiotics, he would have lived. But we didn't, because everything is rationed, because everything is limited, because we're fighting a war against an enemy that started this whole goddamn mess. Cross's composure cracked. His voice rose. And now you stand here and tell me that you took medication, experimental, expensive, limited medication, and gave it to Japanese prisoners. People who might have been on Iwo Jima. People who might have killed my son. And you expect me to believe that was the correct medical decision? Kate's throat was tight. Sir, I can't imagine your loss. No, you can't. And you don't get to use my grief to justify your insubordination. He turned to Eleanor. Major, did you know about this? Eleanor's face was stone. I suspected. I chose not to investigate. Why? Because Lieutenant Morrison's epidemiological projections were sound. Because I've seen what TB can do in crowded conditions. Because sometimes the correct military decision and the correct medical decision aren't the same thing. And I've been doing this long enough to recognize when that's the case. Cross looked at each of them in turn. You're all aware that I can have you court-martialed for this, that I probably should have you court-martialed for this. Yes, sir. They said it in unison. He sat down heavily. Here's what's going to happen. Lieutenant Morrison, you're relieved of duty, effective immediately. You'll be confined to quarters pending formal charges. Major Hayes, you'll submit a complete report detailing what you knew and when you knew it. Captain Sterling will assume responsibility for all medical operations, including the quarantine facility. Sir, Sterling spoke up. What about the prisoners? What about them, their treatment? Morrison started it, but if it's interrupted now, they'll relapse. We'd be back to square one. Dying prisoners, epidemic, risk all the problems Morrison was trying to prevent. Everyone stared at Sterling. Kate couldn't believe what she was hearing. Are you suggesting I authorize continued treatment? I'm suggesting that, regardless of how we feel about Morrison's methods, her medical assessment was correct. Those women have active tuberculosis. They're infectious. Stopping treatment now would be worse than never starting it. We'd have patients who developed antibiotic resistance, increased virulence, and even higher transmission risk. Sterling pulled out a folder. I ran the numbers. If we continue treatment through completion, we spend about $3,000 worth of medication and prevent approximately 200 secondary infections. If we stop now, we'll spend 10 times that much treating the epidemic, plus productivity losses, quarantine costs, and potential mortality among American personnel. He paused. From a pure cost-benefit analysis, continuing treatment is the economically rational choice. Cross stared at him. You want to continue treating Japanese prisoners. I want to minimize American casualties and expenditure. The prisoners are just the vector. If they were infected rats, I'd advocate treating them too. It's not about compassion, sir. It's about math. Kate felt something shift in her chest. Sterling, arrogant, pragmatic rule following Sterling was arguing for her position. Not because he agreed with her morally, but because the number supported it. It shouldn't have mattered why. The result was the same. Cross rubbed his face with both hands. Get out, all of you except Hayes. I need to think. Outside, Kate turned to Sterling. Why did you do that? Because I'm a Dr. Morrison. I don't have to like you or agree with your methods to recognize when you're medically correct. He paused. And because my brother died of tuberculosis in 1932. If someone had broken rules to get him medication, he might still be alive. So I'm returning a favor to someone who never knew they gave it. He walked away before she could respond. Eleanor emerged from Cross's office 10 minutes later. He's making a call to Fleet Command, requesting retroactive authorization for the treatment, citing epidemic prevention and operational necessity. Will they approve it? I don't know. But there's a chance. If they do, you might avoid court-martial. If they don't, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Kate was confined to quarters for 3 days. A tent she shared with 3 other nurses, all of whom suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. She lay on her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling, wondering if her career was over, if she'd end up in prison, if 40 women would survive or relapse when treatment was interrupted. On the 3rd day, Eleanor came to find her. Fleet Command approved it. Kate sat up so fast she nearly fell off the cot. What retroactive authorization for treatment of Japanese prisoners to prevent epidemic spread? They're calling it a public health measure rather than enemy care. Technically, you were still insubordinate for not getting authorization first, but the fact that you were medically correct gives them cover to avoid a full court-martial. So what happens now? You're officially reprimanded. It goes in your permanent file. You'll probably never get promoted again, but you keep your commission. You keep your license, and you get to finish what you started. Kate felt tears welling up. She'd been prepared for prison. A reprimand seemed impossibly light. What changed? Why did they approve it? Because someone at Fleet Medical reviewed Sterling's cost-benefit analysis and realized he was right. Because preventing an epidemic is cheaper than treating one. Because the Red Cross was starting to ask uncomfortable questions about mortality rates in detention camps. And this gives them a good story to tell. Eleanor smiled slightly, and because I may have mentioned to an old friend who works in MacArthur's office that we had definitive proof medical personnel were following proper disease containment protocols, which would look very good in press releases, you manipulated them. I prefer strategically informed. But yes, Eleanor's expression turned serious. You got lucky, Morrison. Very lucky. Next time you decide to save the world, clear it with command first. Yes, ma'am. Now get back to work. Those women still need 6 weeks of treatment, and you're the one who started this mess. You get to finish it. The next 6 weeks passed in careful routine. Kate administered streptomycin twice daily, monitored for side effects, tracked patient progress with meticulous documentation. The women responded beautifully. Fevers resolved. Coughs diminished. Weight stabilized and then improved. By week 8, most were strong enough to walk around the tent. By week 10, they looked like different people. By week 12, they were healthy enough for transfer. Yuki recovered fastest. She became Kate's unofficial assistant, helping with translations, organizing the other women, maintaining morale. They developed a bond that transcended the war, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. On the final day of treatment, Kate administered the last injections. 40 women, all alive or recovering, all scheduled for transfer to the main detention facility in Guam tomorrow. You saved us, Yuki said it quietly. They were outside the tent watching the sunset over Okinawa. We should have died. We were dying, and you refused to let us. I did my job. No, you did more than your job. You risked everything. Your career, your freedom, your life. For enemies. For people you had every reason to hate. I don't hate you. You should. We're at war. My country attacked yours, killed your soldiers, committed atrocities. You would be justified in letting us die. Kate thought about that, about Pearl Harbor and Bataan, and all the reasons she should have walked away, should have followed orders, should have let disease do what bombs and bullets couldn't. My father used to say that medicine is the one profession that doesn't get to hate, because the second you decide someone doesn't deserve treatment, you stop being a healer and start being something else, something worse. She looked at Yuki. I spent 3 years becoming that something worse. This was my chance to remember who I wanted to be. Yuki was quiet for a moment. What will happen to us in Guam after the war, I don't know. Repatriation, probably. You'll go home to Japan, if there's a Japan to go home to. Yuki's voice was soft. We hear rumors. Bombings, cities destroyed, millions dead. My family was in Hiroshima. I don't know if they're still alive. Kate didn't know what to say to that. In 3 weeks, Hiroshima would be gone vaporized in an instant of nuclear fire that would kill more people than tuberculosis ever could. Yuki's family was probably dead already. They just didn't know it yet. I'm sorry, don't be. This is war. People die. That's what happens. Yuki smiled sadly. But some people live. Because of you. 40 women live. That has to mean something. The transfer happened at dawn. 40 women healthy enough to walk loaded onto trucks that would take them to the airfield and then to Guam. Most of them bowed to Kate as they passed a gesture of respect she didn't know how to return. Hana Sato, the youngest, the one who'd been closest to death, pressed something into Kate's hand before climbing into the truck. It was an origami crane folded from a scrap of paper. Delicate, perfect, impossible. Sarah stood beside Kate, watching the trucks disappear. You did it. We did it. You know they'll never thank you publicly. Can't admit they changed policy because a lieutenant broke the rules, I know. And Cross will never forgive you. He'll make the rest of your service here as difficult as possible. I know that too. And the reprimand means you'll probably never make captain. Your career is effectively over. Kate looked at the origami crane. I watched 40 women survive a disease that should have killed them. I prevented an epidemic. I remembered why I became a nurse in the first place. If that's what ending my career looks like, I can live with it. They walked back toward the camp in comfortable silence. Above them, the sun rose over Okinawa, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In 3 weeks, the war would end. In 3 months, Kate would be shipped home to Iowa. In 3 years, she'd be working in a small rural hospital, treating farmers and shopkeepers and vagrants who rode the rails following in her father's footsteps. But in that moment, walking across a war-torn island while holding a paper crane, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that she'd made the right choice regardless of cost. Sometimes that was enough. 50 years later, in a nursing home in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, an elderly woman named Catherine Morrison received a letter from Japan. It came with a photograph, 40 women standing together, many with children, some with grandchildren, a few with great-grandchildren. The letter, written in careful English, was signed by Yuki Nakamura. Dear Kate, we lived. All of us. We lived. It has been 50 years since Okinawa. 50 years since you risked everything to save 40 women who were supposed to be your enemies. I have wanted to write this letter for decades, but I did not know if you were alive or if you would want to hear from us. Then I found you. Modern technology is wonderful for old women seeking to thank angels from their past. I need you to know what happened after you saved us. We were transferred to Guam. We were treated well. Your country honored the Geneva Convention. When the war ended, we were repatriated to Japan. We came home to a devastated country. My family in Hiroshima, they did not survive the atomic bomb. But I survived. Because of you. We all went home. We rebuilt our lives. We married. We had children. Those children had children. And now some of us have great-grandchildren. The photograph shows our reunion last year. 38 of us are still alive. 2 passed peacefully in old age surrounded by family. That is 38 more than should have survived Okinawa. Our children know the story. Our grandchildren know your name. They know that an American nurse chose to see us as human when it was easier not to. That she risked everything, career freedom, life itself, because she believed medicine doesn't get to hate. I still have Private Whitmore's dog tag. I found him, you know. In 1952, he was alive, living in California, married with 2 children. I wrote to him. He wrote back. We corresponded until he died in 1987. He told his children about the enemy nurse who saved him in Manila. I told my children about the American nurse who saved me in Okinawa. Our stories are connected now, forever. You saved 40 lives that summer in Okinawa, but you saved more than that. You saved our futures. Every child born to us, every grandchild, every great-grandchild. They exist because you chose compassion over convenience, humanity over hatred. I do not know if you have children or grandchildren of your own, but if you do, please tell them this. Their mother, their grandmother was a hero, not because she followed orders, because she broke them for the right reasons. Thank you, Kate. Thank you from 40 women. Thank you from 127 children. Thank you from 216 grandchildren. Thank you from 58 great-grandchildren so far. Thank you from all of us who exist because you decided that being a nurse meant treating the sick, all of the sick, regardless of what flag they saluted. That was the whole job, and you did it perfectly. With eternal gratitude, Yuki Nakamura. P.S. Do you still have the origami crane Hana made for you? She is alive and well, a grandmother of 5. She wants to know if you kept it. Kate's hands trembled. Not from arthritis, from something deeper. The nurse found her crying, holding the letter, staring at the photograph of 40 women and 401 descendants. Mrs. Morrison, are you all right? Kate looked up, tears streaming down her face. I'm wonderful. For the first time in years, I'm wonderful. She went to her drawer beside the bed and opened it. Inside, carefully preserved, was a faded origami crane, 50 years old, paper-yellowed creases, deep, but still intact, still perfect, still impossible. She picked it up, gently held it in her palm, and looked at the photograph. 40 women plus 401 lives, all because she'd chosen to do her job. Just her job. Nothing more, nothing less. The nurse brought her paper and pen. Kate's hands shook as she wrote arthritis, making the letters uneven, but the words came easily. Dear Yuki, yes, I kept the crane. It sits in my drawer where I can see it every morning when I wake. For 50 years, it has reminded me of the most important choice I ever made. Tell Hana that her crane is still perfect. Tell all of them that I think of them often. That I wondered if you survived, if you made it home, if the decision I made that summer mattered. Now I know. 441 lives. 441 reasons why breaking the rules was right. I do not have children of my own, but I have you. I have 40 daughters and 400 descendants I will never meet. That is enough. That is more than enough. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for letting me know that the whole job was worth it. With love across 50 years and 6,000 miles, Kate. She sealed the envelope, addressed it to Tokyo, and gave it to the nurse to mail. Then she picked up the origami crane one more time, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. Somewhere in Japan, 40 women were alive. Their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, all because one nurse remembered what her father taught her in a small Iowa town a lifetime ago. Medicine doesn't get to hate. Rules exist to serve humanity, not replace it. That man is sick. I'm a doctor. That's the whole job. She whispered it to herself, to the crane, to the photograph, to the memory of 40 women waiting to die with dignity in an Okinawa tent. I was a nurse. They were sick. That was the whole job. And I did it perfectly.